Welcome to the Geeks Without Glasses podcast, where you hear all about our thoughts on the products of geek culture and how it affects us and the world. I'm Corey, aka Custer.
I'm Blake, aka Flair.
And I'm Kyle, aka Papa Frog.
So why don't we delve into dungeons and slay some dragons, because we got D&D this week. But before that, let's hear once again from the Professor.
Thank you, Corey. Now, as they said, today's focus is the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing game. First officially released in 1974, the D&D we know today was originally based off of the war game by the name of Chainmail. After being adapted by Dave Arneson for his Blackmoor campaign, Gygax saw the potential and released the first 3 D&D books, Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. Since then, it has had quite the success, spanning across multiple generations, 5.5 editions, movies, novels, and more.
Thank you, Professor. Now then, starting us off, we have all now officially had at least our first D&D experience, popped our dice cherry, and made our first level 1 characters. Now, of course, you two have had way more experience in this than I have. In fact, you two were both part of my first session, but I was not a part of y'all guys' first session. So, Blake, I want to start off with you. Tell me about your first experience with Dungeons & Dragons and creating your first character.
I honestly don't remember too much about it because it was so long ago and I didn't really develop my character much. But he was a tiefling, and he was a sorcerer, and his name was Azar Gormag. I think that's how you say it. I just like tieflings because I don't know. I always like devil-like characters that have horns and stuff. So I still like tieflings to this day, but I've kind of broadened my horizons a lot and started playing as other races.
Let's be real. The whole reason you like tieflings because you're a hardcore edgelord.
That's not too far off, actually.
I just want to say that name sounds like a World of Warcraft name.
It does sound like an orc. It sounds like an orc from WoW, yeah. And I didn't get that far because the DM I had, they cut off this adventure pretty quick, but I still have their stuff saved just because it's kind of cool to have your first D&D character saved and always have it just in case,
Yeah.
You never know when it might come in handy. But what about you, Kyle? What can you tell us about your first experience?
Oh, I could tell you loads about my first experience. That's like a memory that's ingrained in my skull.
Yes.
I remember it was at a friend of mine's house, and they had started playing. They had started their campaign. It was the DM and 2 other players, and they asked me hey, you want to join our thing? I remember I'd been watching Yogg's Quest and stuff, and so I had been watching all this D&D stuff. I was super excited, but also incredibly nervous because I had no idea what I was doing. And I just remember going there. It was honestly one of the best experiences just because it was in person, which is always the best way to play D&D, really. And we had snacks, and we all sat around the table, introduced our characters and stuff, and started playing. My first character, which is my longest running character, I've probably played him the most out of anything, is a drunken bard dwarf. And the drunken detail is a very important one because his constant state is drunk. In fact, I actually eventually made a chart of where his voice would change depending on how drunk he is. And I remember because there very rarely would he change in how drunk he was, but it would occasionally. And every time he did, I would always change my voice with him because I thought that was just his character trait. And he's a character I've had him for the longest. Last I played him, he was level 15 or 16, I think.
Damn.
And
Yeah.
That campaign has been going on for 5 years now, and it's just it was such an awesome experience. I still have the character. Um, I've remade him with D&D Beyond, but I also I still have the original character sheet somewhere. Um, but he is my first, and he's kind of like my biggest D&D character. I remember one thing about him was like I was, and still am to be fair, really bad about picking out backstories and stuff. Like, oh, some people are like, oh, my character's a lost prince,
Mm-hmm.
or my character is from the Church of the Holy, and
Yeah.
I jumped through so many different backstories for this character. At one point, he was just born from a mountain. He was raised by hill giants. At one point, he was straight up an alien from Spelljammer. And I think like it eventually coalesced into the perfect backstory, which is just all those other stories are like what people think are his backstory, and no one actually really knows his backstory. Like, not even him. He's just the wandering dwarven drunken bard.
I was gonna say I like the
And-
I always like the image in my head is that each backstory is for a different level of drunkenness that he's at, and it just the more drunk's like, yo, I'm an alien, man.
Bro, let me tell you something. You'll never believe it. I went into space.
Space.
Craziest things up there, I tells ya. I could definitely see him doing that.
How inspired was he by Honeydew? Like, did you take a lot of inspiration from Honeydew for
Not
him?
even a bit, honestly. I've always liked dwarves, since Lord of the Rings and Gimli and such. I've always known dwarves drink a lot, and basically, like, I saw, I get to play as a dwarf. I had the first encounter where the first scene he showed up was he is drunk in a pub, passed out on a table, and he wakes up to the other two adventurers because they, like I said, they had like 2 sessions prior to when I joined in. And since then, he has had a crazy, wild story, not just in that campaign, but I've also brought him to a few other ones, and it's just kind of been a crazy ride with him. And, yeah, he's not a character I'm going to forget anytime soon.
He sounds awesome.
Well, Corey, we have obviously had our first experiences long ago. But you had your first experience last week. So why don't you tell us a little about your first experience and your first character?
Yeah, so literally last week, I had never played a Dungeons and Dragons game. I had never created a character before, I'd say about 2 weeks ago. And so I had a lot of kind of preconceived notions and a bit of fear going into D&D. It seemed like a very overwhelming game for me. But whenever I was creating this, and by the way, just so you guys know, this should be coming up the day before this. The first episode of our new series, Tabletop Trainee, will be of my first session. So you guys kind of get, an idea of what was going through my head when this was going on. But, so, honestly, it was a really cool experience. It was really cool. I didn't expect to get as into it as I did, especially with the character creation, which you guys would see some tidbits of. Obviously, Kyle was there to guide me through it, and he did a great job of guiding me through it. He made it very easy to digest, because when I first saw that sheet and just the amount of different information to have, I was a bit taken aback. Like, good Lord, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. But
numbers.
and I mean, it was a lot of stuff. But at a certain point, because I love RPGs just in general, I'm talking about video games like Dragon Age and The Witcher and Star Wars: The Old Republic. Just go with the MMO side. But I've always loved the idea of creating a character, and I have a very active imagination. But a little bit about my character. So his name is Celebrion. He is an elf. Even his name were based off a couple of elves in Tolkien's lore, specifically Celeborn and Celebrimbor. I love my elves, and I love the Kellas. I love that sound. It sounds very elvish to me. But it was designed more based off of the wood elf, more of the wood elf design in Tolkien's, in his lore, and just the design in The Hobbit. I'm very much a Tolkien fan, if you guys can't tell.
Were there like other elves aside from wood elves? Like,
So
I don't
yeah,
remember
so
there being high elves and stuff, but
well, yeah, there were high elves in. Are you talking about Lord of the Rings or in D&D?
Lord of the Rings. I know in D&D there's high elves and stuff,
Yeah.
but
Ooh, yes,
in
yes.
Lord of the
there
Rings,
are.
I don't remember high elves.
So there are three, at least when you talk about Middle-earth specifically, there are three different races, not races, but like factions of elves, if you will. You got the High Elves, which had like Elrond in Rivendell. They were the High Elves. And then you have the Lothlorien Elves, which were, obviously, kind of like led by Galadriel and Celeborn, if I'm to be believed. And then you have the Wood Elves, which were, kind of headed by Thranduil and Legolas, and they were in Mirkwood. Right. But, and I kind of had like a combination. I really loved how the Wood Elves looked. I love that design. I love the colors. I love the colors of autumn, and then the green and the brown. And that might have been my favorite part of the entire session, just creating the character, especially when we got to the designing of it in Hero Forge. I didn't realize that was a thing we'd be able to do, so I got really excited. And I mean, we spent an hour designing just the figure. I
recently edited it. It was an hour of just the figure. It will be sped up in the full video. It's included with Tabletop Trainee.
Absolutely. And I didn't expect to get as into that as I would, but it one thing, the visual aspect of it, having an actual character and a model and an image to grasp and to kind of connect myself with, helped a lot. And in terms of the actual session of it, it was very just fun. It was just very fun, and it wasn't what I was expecting it to be. Obviously, Kyle designed it to be a bit more of a linear, story-driven type of thing, and to be, really short, sweet, and to the point. And it was right up my alley. Playing on Roll20 was really fun. Having that, once again, that visual kind of aspect to it, something to kind of gravitate myself towards. Because when I first was thinking about D&D, because I had been asked to play D&D before by my roommate, and I was a bit iffy about it. I was a bit iffy because for them, I think they just played straight off with no type of visual thing. I think it was just kind of like sitting around at a table and just going through the session that way, all in person. And it seemed like a lot of admin, I would say. It seemed like a lot of admin and a lot of details and a lot of talking and a lot of exposition. And I remember we were talking about it earlier. Someone, I think either you or Blake, talking about it being like, oh, it's just talking and explaining and math and homework. And I was a bit scared that that's what it was going to be, but it was absolutely not that. Playing on Roll20, it really helped a lot. That really did a lot for me. Even just seeing the little 2D platform where their characters moving around, just being able to see what was going on. And then also even the quote-unquote math aspect and the whole idea of rolling and whatever the hell nat 20s are and rolling and stuff like that. It confused me before I played it, but honestly, it makes quite a bit of sense after you get into it, after your first couple rolls. It really all adds up. It all adds up, and it all ends up making sense in the end. Now, there is a bunch that I'm sure I don't understand. You just mentioned a 5-year campaign. That terrifies me. That terrifies me a lot. But in terms of...
It's 5 years, but it's like we had a session like maybe every other month or so.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's 5 years, but the sessions were drawn out because it was all in person.
Right.
And we did not play online with that. And so, like, it was 5 years paced out, not like every week. All right, guys, let's get into the dungeons.
It's time for session number 512.
There's some people that are really crazy and play every day, so...
If you want, like, the super long session, Critical Role Season 2, I think, is has gone on for 2 years, and they
my God.
recently finished, and they do an episode every week. So
Oh my gosh. So one thing I did learn from my first experience is that this is something that I probably wouldn't be able to play a lot because of two reasons. First off, I would get very addicted, and two, I would get very addicted. Very addicted. I can just tell that something like this, it speaks to my imagination. It speaks to my likeness to create characters like that. But overall, it was a very positive experience, much more positive than I would have thought, because I had some preconceived notions going into it, and my expectations were met and exceeded. It was an absolutely great time. But I do have a question for you guys. How daunting was the idea of creating your guys' first character? The idea of creating a character, was it intimidating at all? And I want to start with you, Kyle.
So obviously there was definitely some intimidation, but I think, especially with today's resources, the wonderful World Wide Web, creating a character is kind of easier than it's ever been. Especially with sites like D&D Beyond, and the site that I originally used to make my character on was OrcPub.
Yeah.
And it is a daunting process. But I feel like it is far less intimidating than what it used to be, because like I said, with D&D Beyond, you have all your information there. I'll be real, not sponsored, but D&D Beyond is pretty fantastic. I use it quite often because you can just search up what you need.
Yeah.
So for all new DMs out there, I highly encourage it. But it definitely makes the character creation process a lot easier. There's a lot of digital. There's apps on phones, 5e Character Builder. You've got D&D Beyond, which has an app. You've got other ones. None are coming to mind, of course, at the moment. But there are several things to help expedite and simplify the process of making a character that I feel has thankfully made it far less daunting, and I think it's part of what has helped people get into D&D more.
Yeah. It's pretty much just better than just using paper. It's like superior to paper. So
Mm-hmm. I agree
as
with
all
that.
digital products usually are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because like if you mess up your sheet on paper, you have to erase it, and then it looks like crap.
But Blake, so, and I guess just kind of preface, the idea of creating a character scared me, because I was like, where do I start? Like, especially with a backstory. And I like what I've done for the backstory so far, but it's very like minimal, except with the two Caspers. Like, I like that. But Blake, were you scared at all of the idea of creating a character and creating a backstory for that character?
At first I was intimidated, but I've kind of learned over the years that like creating a backstory right off the bat isn't like the most important thing ever, and if you just focus on that, it can lock you up and prevent you from playing if you just sit there and be like, oh, I can't think of a backstory. Sometimes it's just better to just play and see what kind of backstory comes out of that from the role play.
Mm-hmm.
But like the first time I played D&D, like I was like, oh, I'm probably not gonna like this because it's gonna be full of like math and
It's got freaking numbers, man. Who cares about numbers?
Yo, I didn't graduate to do homework, guys.
Well, like when you see like all the stats on the character sheet and all the abilities and stuff, you're like, what the hell is this? It's like but as long as you have a good dungeon master and good players that can help you out, it's pretty easy to digest. And I think the first time I played, I didn't use like all the source books. I think I only used like the player's handbook and maybe like one or two other things, so that made it a bit less intimidating. And plus, like with D&D Beyond and stuff, you don't have to read all the fluff. You can just get right to the things that you need to create your character.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is, I guess, kind of the same thing for either of you guys, if you have any good answers. Did you guys have any preconceived notions about D&D, or did you not really know about it when you were first asked to play? Because obviously I kind of doubted the game at first. What about you guys?
I thought D&D, like, because a lot of people got into it because of Critical Role, but my first experience to like tabletop stuff was probably Yogg's Quest. And I thought that's what D&D was, but Yogg's Quest is its own like custom, like homebrew mixture of other systems. It's nowhere close to D&D really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what got me into the idea of playing a tabletop RPG, but I was always intimidated. In hindsight, Yogg's Quest, the system they used was very basic and like in comparison to D&D, so I'm like, really, I wanted to play that. It's like almost a downgrade. But yeah, it was like it got me into the idea, but I was always intimidated because like the universe is cool, like all the different settings, like Faerun and Eberron, they're all cool, but it's like you think that it's gonna be really difficult and combat's gonna be. Well, I mean, combat it can be slow, but like once you learn how combat works, it goes a lot quicker than the first time you get involved in combat.
Combat was an interesting one. What about you, Kyle?
I'll be honest. I might have forgotten the question. Could you
Yes. So, did you have any preconceived notions about D&D
yes.
before you started it?
I like with Blake. I watched Yogg's Quest. However, like I as much as I liked Yogg's Quest, and Yogg's Quest did inspire me to get into D&D a lot. The big thing that really kind of tipped it over in the edge of like, oh my gosh, I've got to play this now, was Node's I think it was called Into the Wild, something like that, or Call of the Wild. That's what it was, Call of the Wild. Node's Call of the Wild D&D session, where it was they had like all the miniatures and stuff, and like a really cool table setup, and like and that one was official proper D&D rules. They had the PHBs there, and that was a lot of the big inspiration for getting into D&D myself. That was the big thing that like once I saw that I was like, I've got to play this. This seems amazing. I've got to find someone to try this out with. And I even drug Blake into a few kind of attempts at D&D that didn't necessarily go over well. But like just the whole concept of tabletop role-playing, a system where basically anything you want to do, you can do it. Like, it was something that was so profound to me because, as you know, I've always loved telling fantastical stories, and having unique experiences, and this was something that just completely blew me away whenever I learned about it.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of one of those things where once I saw Node play, I was like, I've got to do this. This looks awesome. And I use Node a lot for like determining rules and stuff. So like for any of you who watch Tabletop Trainee and see something that's like, oh, that's not how the real rules work. I get a lot of my DM knowledge from other DMs and stuff. I get it from my first campaign, and I got it from Node. So, but it's really just something that's always the concept of has just fascinated me for so long.
I like that. I like the fact that it actually stood out to you, and you had a good outlook on it before you even started.
Yeah. Especially, when you're into video games before, like, D&D is almost like taking off the handcuffs. You have complete freedom to do whatever you want.
That's true.
D&D is the ultimate video game.
It's the ultimate
you think
sandbox.
Skyrim is ultimate with its mods? Imagine Skyrim with any mod you want in the world.
Yeah, you don't need your Randy Savage dragons in Skyrim. We can do it on the table.
You can have the sword of the Slim Jim right there.
Yeah, if you ever wanted to play as Thomas the Tank Engine, well, now you can.
+1 fire damage when attacking with the Slim Jim sword.
Oh man, I got one thing I want to ask y'all guys, and then I'll throw it back to you. But before we move on to the next segment, I got a question for y'all. I want both of you guys, 1 to 10. I want you to rate your first session and how it went. Blake, let's start with you.
I'd rate my first session probably a 7.5 or an 8, just because it wasn't. I wouldn't consider it the best D&D experience I've ever had. It was just kind of me getting used to the game, and it didn't last that long. And future campaigns I had were a lot better, but it was still a good introduction kind of thing. What about you, Kyle?
If I had to rate, I mean, I had many other sessions in that campaign that were far better, just story-wise in the campaign and just experience-wise as far as hanging out with friends. There were a lot of fantastic experiences with that campaign. But if I had to rate the very first session, honestly, I would say a 10, just because between getting to hang out with awesome friends, I remember it was one of the first few nights I stayed up superbly late, because almost all D&D sessions I've played have been superbly late.
Yeah.
But that was a thrilling experience getting to play D&D for the first time with friends that I hold dear, and it was just a fantastic experience all around. So 10 out of 10 for me. Corey, what about you? You tabletop noob.
All right, so out of all of the sessions I've had, which is just the one, so I don't have too much to base it off of, and I'm going to include the character creation for this first session. I'm gonna give it a 9. I was very pleasantly surprised with how fun it was, and 9.5. There's so much fun that I had, because. So
only a 9.5. Where's the other 0.5, huh?
Oh, the 0.5.
Where's the 0.5?
Oh man. So
no,
I was gonna make it really dumb. It's in your mouth. But I was like, oh, you can't say that.
There's the Custer gamer.
Yeah, there's the youth. There's that impulsive youth shining through. So. Oh man. So I was very pleasantly surprised. The character creation was so fun. It was not easily my favorite. It was one of my favorite things about it. Just, messing around on Hero Forge. I love that. I'm going to buy my figure. I'm going to buy it and get it shipped here as soon as I can.
I'll give you well, I've given you the thing for your character.
Yeah, you've given me to it. So I just have to go about and get it. I just haven't done it quite yet. But also, and this is something that I've just learned in general just by playing games with people, is that the group that you play with, it matters a lot. It has a huge impact on how your experience is. And you two and the rest of the guys that I played with were all super nice and helpful and, just very easygoing, and you just made it a really fun time. You didn't take it too terribly serious. And I don't know if I asked any dumb questions, but if I did, you didn't make it seem like I did.
There is no dumb questions when learning D&D. D&D is a complicated as hell game.
What's a dice?
Me and Kyle still ask questions about the game all the time.
Absolutely.
And
hell, I asked another player and them as the DM a question about dual wielding. You're never gonna remember and know everything.
Oh my God, no! I remember about zilch.
That's why you guys need to get D&D Beyond. # not sponsored, but could be.
Not sponsored
D&D
quite yet.
Beyond. Wizards, hey.
Hey man, if you see us, we're waving at you.
If you got maybe a spare $2.
You see, I'm giving you the princess wave right now. I'm just
Here we go.
turning
Hey,
the hand.
everybody. D&D Beyond. Hey, whoa, hey,
Hello.
whoa, check it out, man.
Whoa.
This
Gotta go fast to D&D Beyond, man.
this podcast is sponsored by Magic the Gathering and D&D Beyond.
Yeah.
No, we're not sponsored, but
No.
please.
Hey, just seek us out.
Hey.
But no, man, it was a very fun time, and I will gladly do it again. And I'd say 9.5. I can't complain. I cannot complain.
Clearly, you can complain about something. It's only 9.5.
Just a 0.5. You know what the 0.5 is? Here's what the 0.5
is your shitty attitude.
The 0.5 is the fact that my guy, he didn't die. He got knocked unconscious. I keep thinking that he didn't die. That's one thing that I gotta realize is that the way that death works in that game is the fact that losing health doesn't mean you're dead. Going into the negative fully means that you're dead.
Yeah.
Well, and failing death saving throws.
Yeah. That too.
Yeah, death is definitely one of the most confusing mechanics for new players.
Yeah. But anyway, so that does it for this first bit. Let's take you back to our good friend, the Professor.
Yes, now Dungeons & Dragons has had great success, as we all know, one of its highest points being 3.5 edition, considered by many to be the best edition released. Praised for its more capable character customization, additional rules for more specified play, and general more sophisticated sense, 3.5 is considered to be one of the great peaks in Dungeons & Dragons. Unfortunately, it was followed by the poorly received 4th edition, often avoided for its focus more on tactical combat, calling back to its origin as a war game, leaving behind much of what made it a role-playing game. This caused a great shift, and thusly Pathfinder was created.
Thank you again, Professor. Now that we've talked about our D&D origin, we all have some experiences. We all have things we like and dislike about D&D, and that kind of stuff. What are some of your guys' favorite parts of D&D? And we're gonna start with Corey on this one.
The young pup. Okay, so
Fresh blood.
what I really like about D&D, and I was talking about it before, is the character creation aspect of it, which I kind of thought it would be my favorite, but at the same time, it did kind of scare me. And it's due to a couple things, I guess. First off, just because of my whole RPG thing, I've always loved creating characters. And to D&D's credit, it is very, very detailed. You can do anything you want with your character. You can make them exactly how you want them to be. The exact traits, the exact look, the exact skills, the exact backstory. Same music taste. You can make them right. You can make them left-handed. You can make them ambidextrous if you probably wanted them to. And that's definitely one thing I really like. I like any game that you can play with a group. And I think that always lends itself to being a really good experience. Playing games solo can be fun. A tabletop game solo would be interesting. I'm very curious if there is a tabletop game you could play by yourself. I'm not sure.
They exist. Me and Blake have played them before, and
really,
they're not bad.
You can even play D&D by yourself if you know how to do it. It's possible.
Huh. Interesting. I didn't know that. But there's something that I learned today. But let's see. I don't know if this is so much because of D&D, but no, it's not because of D&D, because this is actually something that I'm kind of not a fan with D&D, now that I was thinking about it, because I was thinking about the visual aspect of a game. And so I know that if you play through something on like Roll20, creating your character through Hero Forge, you have these visual and physical manifestations of the game and of the character that you created. And D&D, from what I know, and I could be wrong, originally it didn't have any of that. It was just more so like a book, and that's kind of how you got your rules, and then you filled out whatever you did on like a notebook. Or how detailed was D&D when it first came out?
When D&D first came out, because it was based off of the miniatures war game,
Mm-hmm.
So they probably had miniatures, but it was probably pretty rare. You definitely didn't have colorful maps like you do today with Roll20.
Right.
They were often, you took graph paper and you mapped out a dungeon. Another thing, D&D back in the day was not, an open world experience really. It was you went into a dungeon and you fought monsters,
Yeah.
and then that was kind of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people just wrote out their character sheet on just regular paper. Just had that.
Notebook paper.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, because that's what I was thinking it would be like at first. And some people, it works for them. Just even having that, it kind of, it works for them. It's enough. For me, I guess it's because of my youth and my just brashness and my just...
Your gosh darn kids
know.
playing your gosh darn video games. They got no imagination these days.
I'm such a horrible millennial.
You gosh darn whippersnappers. Oh, I'm gonna tell you what, I'm gonna take out my cane and better be careful because I'm slowly turning into the newscaster. He's not supposed to show up for another 2 segments.
Nate, what are you doing here? But so like that wouldn't be enough for me. Like if we did the session and Roll20 wasn't a thing and the character creation like it was on Hero Forge wasn't a thing, I probably wouldn't have had as good of a time. I probably would have been able to play it still and still decently enjoyed it, but there would have been a part of me that would have been like, something's missing. Something is missing. And honestly, just due to my sort of inexperience with the game, I don't know much about the rules, so I can't complain about the rules. And I don't know what I don't know. And so that's kind of the only real quarrel I can have with the game is that, and it wasn't even something that, I dealt with because we were able to kind of, not fix it, but go about it a different way due to Roll20. But that was what turned me off to it for so long. That is what turned me off to it for so long. Kyle, what about you?
Much like with you, one of my favorite experiences, or one of my favorite things about D&D is character creation. But honestly, like my top favorite thing about D&D is kind of really just the freedom. And, it's all kind of just a roll the dice. And the best way I can think of to help describe to everyone the freedom that you can have depending on who your dungeon master is like with my dwarf character, I was trying to get into this black market area, and there was like a bouncer outside. And whenever I talked to him, he wanted me to provide the password. Well, I didn't know the password, obviously, so I rolled to try to convince him that the password had been changed, and it was actually a whale's butthole. This was senior year of high school, so very mature people here, mind you.
Oh my god.
I failed the roll, but through like roleplay and stuff, I was like, oh, wait a second, it's not a whale's butthole, it's a whale's butthole.
Oh my god.
Are you kidding me? That was approved, and I was let into the thing.
I love that.
And it stands as like one of the funniest reminders of in D&D you can really kind of do anything. You're not restricted to the confines like with many other video games. You're not really that restricted.
Right.
At least if you have a good dungeon master. If you have a bad dungeon master, they can restrict you. They'll confine you. They'll be like, oh, you can't do this. That doesn't make sense. I'll admit I'm like that occasionally. But to be fair, I'm like that with like really outlandish things.
Really?
Yeah,
so Hole isn't quite too outlandish for you.
Nah,
I'm curious what is.
Oh.
What is too outlandish for you?
Too outlandish would be like, oh, I'd like to pull a whole dragon right out of my anus. Just pull it right on out there, and now he's my pet.
Yeah.
And you see here, I can do this because I've got Find Familiar, And I know it's not on the list, but dragons are magical creatures, so I really kind of feel like I should just pull them right on out of there, And that's probably something I'd be like,
Oh, I wasn't ready for
Yeah.
that.
A lot of times, whenever I DM and stuff, I'm fine with players doing anything, so that way, or so long as they can explain to me logically how they are achieving this. Like, what actions are they taking to achieve the goal that they want? I'm rarely going to be like, okay, just roll it and you're good. I want an explanation. But
Okay.
but that's probably my favorite thing about D&D is just the freedom of creativity of what you can do. And my least favorite thing is probably the combat of D&D. It's not bad by any means, I feel. I mean, my biggest issue with it is it's very slow. Combat in D&D can take, even a small little encounter, a couple bandits, if, depending on the circumstances, could take 30 minutes to an hour to do. And,
Yeah.
there are games where whole sessions are eaten up by just combat.
Yeah.
And combat is also where things get a little bit more restrictive. You can be clever in combat, as I've done in the past, but you're less you have less freedom when it comes to combat. It's a lot more, okay, I go here, I shoot, or I swing with my sword, or I cast this spell, next turn.
Yeah. If your DM is like a rules lawyer, that's the time where a DM could really suck. If your DM's open and like lets you try cool things in combat, then that can be cool.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. I can kind of see that because, I mean, in terms of the tabletop trainee, I mean, that last fight with the bandits, how long did that take, you think?
A decent while. I think there was at least 30 minutes after we had the issue. And then I think it was like 30 minutes to an hour before that.
Yeah. Because it was kind of two-parter. It was kind of a two.
Right. You had the
fella came in.
dialogue part, and then you went out and you fought bandits, and then that took up the rest of the session time.
Yep. Okay.
So-
I was
Yeah.
just checking.
Yeah.
Blake, what about you?
I would say one of my favorite things about D&D, like Kyle, is the freedom. And since he told a story, I'll tell a story. I guess so it's a pretty recent story of, in the one of the campaigns I'm in right now, Kyle's campaign. I'm playing as a Luxodon bard, and his name is Ragoom. And I went into like a demon orc, I guess, dungeon or crypt or whatever you want to call it, and I had an idea of, like, since we were already going to get caught because they already knew we were there because we were making a crap ton of noise, I decided to play demonic music, and it didn't really work out, but it was cool. I mean, I successfully rolled to know demonic music, but it didn't impress any of the demons there. They were like, I was the Nickelback of demon bands, basically.
I mean,
Nice.
It impressed a lot of the lesser demons. It's when the Balor came in, he was like, fucking cheapo!
Yeah. But, it was cool. It was a cool roleplay moment, because I was like, we're gonna get caught anyway, so I might as well do something cool, So,
Play demon music. I hope that D&D's version of demon music is you just play some metal. Just fucking.
That's what me. It's like fucking. It's just Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy.
Yeah, even though it's like, I know it's like medieval fantasy, I was just like, that's always what I imagine demons listen to, is like metal music and stuff.
I'm going off the rails
exactly.
on a crazy train.
Out off of, because his instrument is just his elephant trunk, so he played Crazy Train from his elephant trunk.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's canon.
I would, but, on the other hand, I agree that, combat can be slow, and there's really no way to expedite more meaningless encounters. Like if it's just a random encounter, there's really no way to speed it up to make it go faster. You just have to play it out, unless the DM is just like, I don't want to do this, and just avoids it.
I want to do this. You just kill him. Like, come on, let's go.
He just dies.
I think that's kind of a bit of an important thing for DMs to kind of do is to kind of reduce the random meaningless encounters. Like if you have an encounter, even if it just seems like just a random fighting bandits in the woods or whatever, it really should lead into something more. Like it should be the kickoff point into like a side quest. Like, oh, I fought bandits in the woods, but surprise, the bandits are actually vampire lords, and their CR rating was like crazy high.
Yeah.
CR rating?
Challenge rating.
Okay.
The rating was a bit redundant, but challenge rating is basically how high a level monster you're facing.
Okay, I get what you mean. Nice.
But like other systems like have like they'll have like regular combat rules, and then they'll have like expedited combat rules for combat that doesn't really matter, but you still want to have a battle. But it's just like a lot quicker because usually they only handle it in 1 or 2 rolls, and it's usually a lot more clean and convenient. That's like the only, and also D&D, especially more recently, has been trying to basically phasing out alignment. Like alignment feels way less important than it used to be. Like even on Roll20, there's not even an alignment part for your character sheet anymore. That's how unimportant it's become. And I'm like, why is alignment just being phased out? It was like one of the coolest parts about D&D.
They're just gonna quietly shuffle it under the rug.
I mean, I think that they should bring up
to know about alignment.
I think alignment shouldn't. I mean, I don't think it should have like mechanical bonuses, but I mean, if it does, I feel like each alignment should get their own like cool thing that's unique to them. Like neutral gets a thing, and evil gets a thing, and good gets a thing, and that way it would incentivize players to roleplay those alignments. And sort of like in Fable, where it changes your appearance. I've talked about this several times. Where alignment affects your character more than just like I'm good or evil or neutral.
He has. I've gotten emails. They never stop.
But alignment. I do wish D&D was a bit less combat focused, but I wouldn't change it too much just because that's kind of why a lot of people like D&D because of the combat. So I don't think I would change it too much just because that would. You could just play another game if you want a less combat-focused experience. So I wouldn't really change it that much, besides maybe making like expedited rules for smaller encounters.
I got you.
But yeah, that's the main things. But I mean, I feel like yeah, it's just that's what I think is like I mean, D&D doesn't have too many like bad things about it where I'm like, this is just absolutely terrible and like it really bothers me, but it just has, the more you play, you see like the little things that nag you about it, and it makes you want to switch to another system or add a new homebrew rule or something like that. It's not really like anything that's humongous that ruins the experience.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can get that with anything that you're really into. Like, I didn't even think about the combat, but you saying that, it makes sense. Like, the combat, it took a while, but me, I was all bright-eyed and really woo with everything going on.
There's some combats like you're really invested in because you're fighting the big bad guy or you're fighting like someone really important. But if you're just fighting some wolves or rats, you're like, oh my god, when's this gonna be over?
So with the combat, because this is something you both had mentioned, what would you do, if anything, to change the combat? Or would you just keep it as it is? Because, like, how much do you think you could change the combat of a tabletop game like D&D?
That really is just kind of like... basically, it boils down to, like, how unique do you want your character to be?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I'm being 100% honest... If I had to expedite combat just to make it quicker, I might almost suggest something like Warhammer 40k. I personally think 40k's combat is pretty quick. It seems like it takes forever, but like when you think about what happens in a turn, it's very quick and concise. And there's the same amount of rolling, but fewer dice involved, I guess you could say. Like, you don't have D4s or D8s and stuff. But also at the same time, that also significantly reduces, like, what makes your character unique, what makes him stand out from, everyone else, Like wizards, they've got their spells, and rogues, you've got, sneak attack. And rangers are rangers, and they exist. And it's just it's one of those things that I feel, in order to expedite combat the way that I would want, you would really have to kind of change the system again, either into a war game style or into my other favorite style, which is Powered by the Apocalypse. That is a lot more of a narrative-focused style.
Okay.
And I think if done correctly, like I've heard Dungeon World is a really good version of it. I feel like if done correctly, could be a decent alternative, because I've always felt D&D is supposed to be about the narrative. Combat is important. Combat is something to have, and I know some players are big into combat, and that definitely should stick around for them. But I also feel as though combat shouldn't detract from a game.
Yeah,
right.
We should have more optional rules for combat instead of just like one rule set for combat.
Exactly.
That's the problem. It's just like there's just, I mean, you can obviously homebrew it as much as you want, but the book says this is how combat goes. Like there's no debating it. You just always have to play it out.
I got you. I was curious. Thank you.
But yeah, it's combat is something that is I don't think it's a flaw of D&D. It's just something that it makes D&D D&D.
Yeah.
Because if without the combat, it would just feel like another system. It wouldn't feel like D&D.
So, 5th edition has been out for a while now, and they've gone through quite a few different editions over the years. You've got, of course, the original Advanced D&D, D&D 2nd edition, which I think Advanced D&D might... Is it? I can't remember if that was 1st or 2nd edition.
I can't quite remember.
That's a good question.
You've got 4th edition, the one everybody hates. You've got 3.5, the one that I think 3.5 was the one where it split into Pathfinder and D&D.
3.5 is like the second most popular edition of D&D.
Right. But say that they were to release a 6th edition soon. I mean, I think I remember hearing that they were working on it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of rumors about it.
Right. What would you want in a 6th edition? And we will start with Corey on this. The one who knows the least about D&D total. Tell us what you want to see in a game that you've only ever played once.
All right, fellas, are you ready for this expertise?
Let's hear it.
This is what I want. I want pictures. I want pictures of my guys. I want my own D&D. It's got hookers and blackjack. I want my hookers, I want my blackjack, and I want my gin. Okay, so honestly, I I can't. Just something visual. That's all I can think of. Just include figures. Include somehow figures that you can edit real time. Physical figures where you can build it up like Legos. That's what I want in my 6th edition. Also, quick aside, the 4th edition, why is it hated?
Because
Fourth,
it made
4th edition reverted a little bit more into like what is that? Fucking oh my god, I can't. Reverted back into war game. Sorry, I don't know why my brain just crapped out there. But it reverted a little bit more into war game. The combat was far more complicated and took way longer. Also, I think 4th edition was when they focused a lot more on angels and demons. And that's kind of when, the whole church thing got involved. Oh my gosh,
yeah, I got you.
There's games teaching our kids about Satan. We gotta do something.
We're gonna take them away.
We gotta take down these guys. I can tell you what. And
yeah, I mean, I gotta give props to 4th edition though. We wouldn't have Dragonborns without 4th edition. So
that's true. 4th edition gave us some good stuff, but it is also the least liked of the editions.
Okay, I got you. Okay, so I was just curious. Now, literally, it would just be something like figures. I can't think of anything else.
D&D has figures though.
But like, have it come with.
And they even have modular figures. Like I know they've released like figures for like, oh, you're playing a wizard. Well, here's your wizard at level 1. Here's your wizard at level 3. Here's your wizard at level 5.
Oh,
here's your wizard at level 10.
I didn't know this. I thought the Hero Forge was just like a totally separate thing. But then D&D was like, hey.
Figurines.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, then no, just keep it as is.
Corey
Change nothing.
Is disqualified.
I'm disqualified. This is what you do, 6th edition. Just do the exact same thing as you did before.
Just do everything you did before.
Yep. Except include me in it. Just say like, this guy played it and he likes it. That's all.
Just like there's a random monster in the monster manual that's just like Custer Gamer, and look, if you encounter him, he puts down a Minecraft block, and
he puts down some
you
TNT.
Are impeded.
He puts down a block and a terrace shows up.
Yeah,
he
don't
throws a snowball and the ground beneath you opens up and you fall to a lower layer.
Yeah. You see, he throws an egg at you and it has a 1 in 10 chance of turning you into a chicken.
Exactly.
And I want to make sure that they spell my name, not how it is on YouTube. I want them to spell it CHO with the little dots over it, STUR, and then GHEYHNER.
Was that like Coaster Game?
No, it's still
I
Custer
wasn't even
Gamer.
paying attention to the gamer part spelling to try to.
Yeah. No, it's Custer Gamer, but like just in fantasy. You see,
fantasy.
You can make it.
You are not Custer Gamer. You are Lord Custer Gamer.
Yes, I'm Lord Custer Gamer. But honestly, that's all I can think of. Blake, someone who is far more experienced than me, can you give some actual advice?
Honestly, I don't think they should make a 6th edition. I always looked at it as they should make a 5.5, something that is like just expand. It's basically an expansion for 5e, not like a full-on new edition. Because people like 3.5 because it expanded upon 3rd edition. It wasn't a completely new thing. So I feel like that would be a more popular choice from a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the main things that I would improve in like a 5.5 is make sure everything, like all the source books and stuff, are backwards compatible with the new edition. Do not make them all outdated, because that would piss off everyone, and no one wants to have to rebuy all these books again.
Hey guys, we reworked the entire thing, so now paladins actually shoot lasers out their eyeballs. I know, it's crazy. And they actually, their fists do a D6 with armor, D8 with heavy armor, and D4 with no armor.
Ooh.
Yeah. I think doing more stuff with D&D Beyond definitely still needs to happen for the next edition, and just maybe add. The only thing I can think of is maybe add one or two more classes like on top of what's already there. Maybe I don't know if they could think of a new class, maybe, or some new races. That's the only thing I could think of without like changing the core. Because I don't want D&D to change too much, because it's like, if it changes too much, then it's not going to feel like D&D anymore. It's just like I just kind of want 5th edition, but with more content, which they can kind of just do that now with source books. They don't really need to make a new edition of D&D.
We've changed movement from feet to inches. Not life inches, in-game inches.
And my only like request is like I want Artificer to be in the base like player's handbook instead of like in a source book. Like just as a base class, because Artificer is just such a cool class.
Well, to be fair, Artificer was something that they kind of thought up of late as far as implementing it into 5e.
Yeah, I think if they made a new edition, it would become a core class, so...
Probably.
That's like... And maybe, like what I talked about earlier, make the combat, have more rules for combat. Maybe have, like, expedited rules, or, like, what Kyle was talking about with, like, the Warhammer 40k type thing. Or,
I got you.
You could still have the normal combat rules for people that like that, because obviously you don't want to change that, because then people would rage quit D&D and go back to 5th edition. I probably would too. Because you still need those type of battles for the cool encounters. Like if you're fighting the big bad evil guy, you want to have an actual fight with them and not just it ends in one dice roll. That would be very anticlimactic.
He rolled to wound. Your model has 1 health. You did not make your saving throws, so your character is off the board now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
And
powerful roll made by Custer Gamer.
And and the other thing is like make alignment important again. Actually give it some importance again. Not like old school D&D where you suffered penalties for alignment change, because that's a little too extreme. But like, maybe you could have that as an optional role, not like a required role, but it would just be cool to have some optional stuff for alignment that like makes alignment more important again. Like you don't have to engage with it if you don't care about alignment and just want to play your character, but if for people that like that stuff like me, it would be really cool.
The D&D MAGA, make alignment great again.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. But what about you, Kyle? What would you add or take away in a 5.5 or 6 edition?
5.5 or 6 edition. I don't know. Honestly, aside from the combat thing, I'm a pretty big fan of 5e. I think 5e does a lot of things right. 5e does a lot of things good. All that I could think of that they could add would be simple enough to just throw in the source book and release it as it is. Like, I want to spell a proper 5e Spelljammer setting, but again, that's just fucking throw it in a source book, give it its own source book, and you're good. It's that's kind of one of those things where I don't think I'd want to really change much. I'm relatively happy with how D&D is.
Yeah.
Even the changes I suggested to combat, like looking back on them, that it's kind of one of those things where some of these things are really can just be solved with a good DM. Alignment. Alignment being important. Make alignment great again. That's something that if the DM just implements proper, story implications for it, like, oh, the demons, because there's sense alignment as a spell, or detect alignment or whatever. So like, just, implement that more with your NPCs for alignment to make more of a, more of a standing, because just having like a mechanical value of, oh, you have +3 alignment, so you get you get bonus to charisma cause you're good looking. Gosh darn it. You know that's. I mean, you could do that, but that's kind of one of those things where alignment then feels like I personally don't think alignment should feel like a game mechanic and should instead be more of a story mechanic. That's my personal thought on it. Like,
Yeah.
because if it's just a game mechanic, it's kind of you don't really you don't really have much of a purpose to seek it out, or you don't have as much of a purpose to seek it out as you did before. The only difference is now you're kind of min-maxing for it. Like it would be good for min-maxers, but as far as, just playing casual D&D with your friends and, doing story and whatnot, you don't really have a real reason to seek out better alignment, mechanically wise, any more than you would, story wise. Like for alignment to matter, that's something that it should be in the story. It should be in the campaign, and that again relies a lot more on the DMs than it does anything else.
I mean, I wasn't advocating for like full stat buffs for alignment. I think that's not kind of ridiculous, but I feel like little flavor things would be cool.
You know what, Blake? You say make alignment great again. I say it is great again.
I mean, a good DM can a good DM can make D&D a completely different game if they want to. So I mean,
they can, with the right tools, with our powers combined,
we can keep alignment great.
We can keep alignment great. It doesn't have to be great again. It's just great.
Yeah, it's as amazing as it's going to be right now.
Well, if I may, real quick, ask, but before we head on to our next segment.
All right.
So we discussed how we would rate our first D&D session. How would you rate D&D kind of overall? And Corey, I know you're pretty fresh. You haven't played any other tabletop RPGs. So we're gonna start with you again.
Yeah,
let's hear it. Come on, Corey. How would you rate the only tabletop RPG game you've played in your entire life?
Alrighty, so I can only go along with how my first session was, and I'm going to give it a 9.5. I had
9.5.
very few issues with it. Like the combat, now that you mention it, I can kind of see, why the whole alignment thing I never had to deal with. But even the combat, it worked for me just because I was so into it. And plus, when the big baddie came in, I was like, ooh, yeah, it's going to take a while. Even though he knocked me out, I was still a fan of it.
This guy's a tough dude.
He was a tough cookie. He totally messed up my Caspers. I felt so bad.
He messed up everyone.
Everyone.
Except for Baron.
Everyone went down at least once. And
Yes.
that's what's good. That made it matter. And that's what I like about it. So honestly, yeah, I just gotta give it a 9.5. Blake, the more experience between me and you by a margin, I would say. What would you rate Dungeons and Dragons as a whole?
That's a hard choice because a lot of systems I like wouldn't exist without D&D. So it's like, do I rate it because, it's the pioneer of, creating what we have today, or should I rate it just standalone on its own?
I would say rate it as a game. Like if you were standing and you had to put your list of where you would rate each tabletop game in order on a bookshelf in order to unlock the secret puzzle that you got from the back of the Declaration of Independence to get the treasure. If you had to do that, like what slot would the D&D book fit into?
I know it's going to be kind of a controversial rating, but I think I'm going to give D&D an 8 just because I think that there are systems that are better than D&D.
Oh, I thought when you say controversial, I thought you were gonna say I'm gonna give it like a 2.
No, I mean, 8 is still good. It's not like I'm saying it's terrible.
This might be controversial. I know I talked about how much I love D&D before, but -4 for me.
Yeah, it's not even a podium.
I'd rather rip my toenails off than play D&D. Gosh, I mean, it all comes back down to I don't want to do math after school. That sounds dumb.
I know. Why?
It's just, even though D&D is, a lot of games today wouldn't exist without D&D. It's like D&D is there are other stuff I like about other systems that D&D just doesn't do. So I'm like, I still like D&D just because it introduced me to the, table. I mean, I think it's most people's introduction. Like 90% of people that play tabletop RPGs probably got in through D&D. So, so I mean, I would give it a solid 8, but it's not like I don't hate D&D. I love D&D, but it's just like if I had to compare it to everything that I know about, I'm just like it has to be an 8. What about you, Kyle?
If I were to compare all the D&D games, honestly, or not all the D&D games, but all the tabletop games, honestly, I would probably say a 6 or a 7.
Whoa.
I love D&D. Here's the thing. I love D&D. D&D is fantastic. So, like, although 6 and a 7 may seem low, that is, just straight up, that's not saying D&D is bad by any means. I do love D&D. There are just other systems that I like more. I like the Fantasy Flight, Genesis / Star Wars system. I find that to be very entertaining. Like I said before, I like Powered by the Apocalypse a whole lot more. It's just kind of one of those things where I love D&D, but I've played a lot of different systems, and there are just ones that I find suit my preferences a lot more than D&D.
Dang, I thought that 8 was controversial.
I know. I wasn't. I
thought
was,
that 8
I
was controversial, and now GWG is going to be burned to the ground after my 6.5 rating.
Because a lot of people think that you can only rate something a 10 or a 0, which I'm like...
The only options are 10 or nothing, and if it's not 10, then you are dead.
I was fully expecting to welcome Kyle on the 9.5 bandwagon with me, and then I had my hand up for the virtual high five, and it's still there.
And then,
yep,
and it will stay there.
It's gonna stay there. I'm just gonna be in this pose for the rest of time.
Definitely, small shout out to players who are experiencing or curious about D&D for the first time. I highly encourage you to try D&D. It is a fantastic starting point for tabletop RPGs. But, that said, do not limit yourself to D&D. Me and Blake, we played D&D. Our first games were D&D. We love D&D. But our love for D&D made it somewhat difficult to get into additional systems. So, if you like D&D, if you dig it, check out other systems. Open your eyes.
Yeah, don't be afraid to introduce Don't be afraid to try to get your friends into different systems.
Exactly. There's tons of stuff online for free. You have to pay for some of it. There's tons of stuff out there. So, advice to all you starting out, and even to all of you who have played D&D for a while, just try something new every so often. It never hurts.
Yeah, even if it's just Pathfinder, I mean, that's better than nothing.
Exactly. Pathfinder is more complicated D&D, but you know what? It widens your scope, and I just encourage that to everyone. Open minds equal to open hearts, or something like that.
I know not of what they speak, just so you guys know. I have no idea what they're talking about.
Corey's still fresh. We'll have a future episode of D&D where we explore our returning.
And probably
60 years from now.
Yeah. Plus, they'll probably play
D&D 2.
Well, yeah, you'll have a different opinion of it when we next time revisit the topic. So
exactly.
Yeah, they'll probably have me play like 25 different tabletop RPGs before that.
Absolutely.
And I am all in for it. My mind is ready to be destroyed by all of the games.
You're gonna play so many games. Your brain is just gonna explode.
Yeah,
it's gonna melt.
It'll melt for sure. All right. Well, so we've talked about what we've loved. We've talked about our firsts. Before we get into our next segment, of course, we have our professor, and then we will talk about how D&D has influenced the world, and the products that we have enjoyed both before and after D&D. So, but first up, the Professor. Now, Dungeons & Dragons, as we know, has expanded far beyond the simple media of tabletop RPGs. The very first of this was the novel Quack Keep, written by Andre Norton in 1978, and based upon his very first experience with Dungeons & Dragons. The story follows the tale of 7 gamers having been pulled into the fantasy setting and their adventures within it. Of course, in 1980, with the release of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, many more novels were produced, and the release of the well-known Dragonlance series began. The first book, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, was released in 1984 and paved the way for one of D&D's most famous settings. Awesome! Thanks again, Professor. Now, like he explained, D&D has expanded far beyond just the tabletop community. From movies and video games to novels and cartoons, D&D has had a finger in every pie for quite some time now. So I'd like to take a minute and talk about our favorite D&D content, or simply content that has been heavily influenced, such as many RPGs we have today. To kick this off, I'd like Blake to explain to us, his favorite.
I mean, you gotta talk about the elephant in the room, Baldur's Gate. That's a big, video game. Even people that have not played the tabletop probably have played Baldur's Gate just because it's such an iconic RPG. Even, the original Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, there's a whole bunch of other tabletop systems that are influenced by D&D and wouldn't exist without D&D, like Pathfinder is directly influenced by 3.5, so it's just, there's just so much, movies, inspired by D&D, it's crazy how much there is, funny enough, My Little Pony has some inspiration from D&D, so...
What?
I wouldn't be surprised. Also, for this, let's focus on, stuff that isn't tabletop games.
That's just the first thing that comes to my mind, because it's easy to compare it.
No, I mean, yeah, Baldur's Gate, I'm just more referring to, you mentioned Pathfinder.
Yeah. I can't, obviously there's I know there was a live action, D&D movie that apparently wasn't that good, but, because it had nothing, didn't have much to do with actual D&D lore. But you got stuff I would consider, even though, it's not official, I guess it's kind of official, but, Critical Role is kind of it's like a D&D show, kind of.
Critical Role definitely is, the closest thing we have to a D&D show at the moment.
Yeah, so, it's the closest thing we got, or maybe something like, Harmon Quest, which I don't even know if that's still on anymore, but it was pretty cool. There's been some crazy crossovers with D&D, there's the Rick and Morty stuff, which is pretty cool. I've heard, I haven't really messed around with it. D&D has invaded a bunch of aspects of media. A lot of people first got introduced to D&D because of Stranger Things. I have never actually seen Stranger Things, so that's something I need to still watch.
Kicked off the cast!
Wow, Blake, how dare you?
D&D itself is heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings. I mean, D&D wouldn't exist probably without Lord of the Rings, or it'd be very different. So D&D is just pretty much, especially nowadays, has really infected pop culture in a good way, not in a bad way. But what would you say, Kyle, is some of your favorite D&D inspired media?
Well, real quick, I just want to say, I feel like if we didn't have Lord of the Rings, D&D would probably be a lot inspired or heavily influenced by Conan, the barbarian, not the talk show host.
Good way to specify. I was very curious.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like there could be some confusion there. But Conan was the one of the original sword and sorcery books back in the day, and you had crazy wacky creatures and monsters. You had magic. You had awesome epic warriors and stuff. So probably D&D would probably look a lot like Conan without Lord of the Rings. Which honestly I would not have opposed. I've read some of the Conan stories. They're really good. As far as my favorite thing that's been influenced by D&D, definitely, Critical Role, not just their show where they play D&D, but they actually released a Critical Role like Vox Machina, Vox Machina cartoon series based off of D&D, and they've released books, comic books based off of their D&D games. So that's something I feel, is a great way that D&D has kind of reached another outlet. Of course, the D&D video games. One video game I find that's heavily inspired by D&D that is technically not D&D official is Divinity Original Sin 2 is very D&D inspired, especially with the fact that it has straight up just a Dungeon Master mode in it, which is super awesome in itself. And, it's probably the closest thing we have currently to D&D sessions between DM and player in a video game format, with second closest probably being Neverwinter Nights, because the tool they have to build your own campaigns is just crazy as hell and awesome. And, I know a lot of people who have, gotten jobs with programming from learning from that. So it's definitely, an awesome program in itself. I've played with it, not to the degree that others have, but that's one thing. Also, most RPGs are very D&D inspired. Elder Scrolls, for a good example. The original Elder Scrolls relied on the classic D&D concept of it rolled a dice digitally, of course. It calculated your stats, and that told you if you hit or not. And I feel like the most, I guess you could say, offender of this kind of thing is probably Morrowind, when they introduced kind of more action-focused gameplay, while still having the rolling mechanic. That was before they switched to just action only. Well, more action-focused, I should say. In Oblivion and later on Skyrim. But, Morrowind was one where I remember the pain in the ass it was to aim at someone in the head and shoot, and then have a little message pop up saying, "You missed." I was like, son of a bitch!
I mean,
I hit that son of a bitch.
I mean, even people that like Morrowind usually modded to get rid of the dice rolls.
Exactly. But that's just kind of one of the aspects that, D&D has really kind of, affected the game community into what we know and love today. Stats, stuff like that. That probably wouldn't be necessarily the same without D&D. A lot of MMOs, because MMOs you roll basically to successfully hit, because a lot of MMOs have no concept of actual gameplay. So they have the dice and whatnot. I'm gonna get a lot of flack from MMO.
I was gonna say, damn.
I don't think any of us are huge fans of MMOs.
You better drop your boom mic after that.
But yeah, definitely, there's a lot of stuff, but definitely my favorite is probably Divinity and Elder Scrolls. But yeah, Corey, you who hath just been exposed like a wee Bob in the middle of the darkened forest.
I am a Bambi, awaiting for
a wee Bob looking for her mother to suck her teat. What have you to say about D&D?
Here is what I have
D&D
to
influenced
say.
stuff.
Here is what I have to say. Okay, let's be. I'm gonna be real with y'all here.
Let's drop the voices. I'm not a babe.
I am a babe when it comes to this. I had no idea that D&D had this much influence. I remember talking about this right before we started recording about Neverwinter, and I remember there was a Neverwinter game on the PS3 or PS4 that I played, and I loved it. And I had heard of that before I knew that Dungeons and Dragons had influenced it. The rolling thing and the way that works in RPGs, I immediately thought of Dragon Age Origins because of hitting
Dragon Age is
and
a
missing.
big one like that.
Missing on an obvious. It was so annoying. It was
They
so.
roll a dice, they add your stat, and then if you hit, you hit. If you didn't, you missed.
I'd swing right at you with my dual wield because I love my rogues in Origins. Miss. Are you kidding me right now? Like, come on now. And like and Critical Role, I've never seen before. I've never actually seen, I think, any bit of Critical Role. I think I've watched a bit of Node, but not too much. I'm not familiar with either of those. I guess I got to get kicked out too. Stranger Things I've never seen. I didn't even know that D&D was in Stranger Things. So I'm very.
That's it. All right.
Thank
you guys for joining the Papa Frog podcast.
Yeah, that's
I
it.
hope you've enjoyed it.
I'm sorry, Blake, but that's it for us. I guess we'll have to walk the lonely road. But like honestly, I did not know that it was such an influential thing. It's fascinating to hear though, and it makes sense. I mean, you got to realize, a game that came out in the 70s and is still as big as I'm guessing it ever was back then. I mean, it's bound to have some cultural impact. So it's fascinating for me to hear. Absolutely. As terms of a favorite or just a thing that stands out, Dragon Age, because it's one of my favorite games ever. So we'll say Dragon Age Origins. Hey there.
Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins is a classic.
It's so good. It's so good. One of my favorite games ever.
Yeah.
A friend of mine relates like Dragon Age Origins to being like closer to D&D than even Divinity, like in terms of just the base story. So.
Yeah, especially like the stories of your companions and stuff are all really good.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, especially in Origins. Like, not to get too much on, I guess, a little tangent, but yes, the companions in Origins. Like, I played the later Dragon Age games, but Origins had just some top tier, just characters and companionships and the stories behind them. But anyways, I mean, yeah, I could see the similarities whenever you think about just the rolling aspect and the way the story goes, and just absolutely, yeah. I can see all of that.
Like I said, the biggest one that does it is probably MMOs, and and honestly, like one of the biggest like D&D to video games I can think of is probably Knights of the Old Republic. KOTOR, you had skills, you had modifiers, all hits were to roll with dice. Like honestly, Knights of the Old Republic was D&D with a Star Wars skin on it, basically.
Yeah. A lot of games wouldn't have, like Knights of the Republic, they wouldn't have a morality system without D&D.
Exactly,
Yeah, especially like Fable. I love Fable because of its morality system.
Yeah, Fable does the way that the morality changes your character. That definitely a very fascinating aspect.
Yeah, and on the role play side of things, you wouldn't have AI Dungeon either, probably without D&D.
Almost definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, until you like really look at it, you don't really realize how much D&D's influenced our culture.
Exactly.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, we've certainly all talked quite a bit about our loves and hates, and I think it's time for us to go ahead and start closing out. But before we do, as before, we have our newscast here.
Yes.
To bring you up to date as to the news and going-ons of the world of D&D. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GWG News. thank you once again. Now, I got some sour news. First off, Nate Nathaniel here. Unfortunately, Tommy Thompson hadn't fully recovered from his last newscast, and but thankfully we got his understudy in here. We got ourselves Sam Smith in here. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself here, Sam Smith?
Hello, everyone. I am Sam Smith.
Yep, there he is. Yep, and anywho, so he's new. Hopefully, he ain't gonna cause no trouble like last fella.
Oh no,
Boy, let me tell you, you got a low bar to surpass this time, Sonny.
Trust me, being his understudy, I know all about Tommy. He takes himself a bit too seriously, doesn't he?
Yep. You know what? He thinks he's all that. He just some newscaster on a podcast. He don't realize this ain't the Phantom of the Opera. No shit, Anywho, so up to the news. This week we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons.
Absolutely.
You ever face yourself some dragon in a dungeon?
I have a couple of times. Let me tell you something.
Couple of times.
Usually doesn't turn out too well for me, Nate. How about you?
You know what? I think that's just for nerds. Just kidding. I play it myself a little bit. Anywho, here's the thing. All right, we got ourselves 2 new books coming out. So we got A Wild Beyond the Witchlight adventure book, which is coming out on the 21st of September in 2021.
It's only a few months away.
We also have Strixhaven, Curriculum of Chaos, coming out November 16th, 2021. And those are the big D&D books coming out.
Are you much of a reader?
You know what? I do enjoy a nice novel on the toilet.
It relaxes the mind, doesn't it?
It relaxes the mind, relaxes the bowels.
And of course, we got some more headlines. First off, a brand new third-person action RPG game called Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance is set to release in June 22nd, just 10 days from today.
Man, that's pretty soon.
I know, really soon, a week and a half. Are you going to get that game?
Probably not.
Me either. I don't play video games. That stuff rots the mind. But also, something I might actually get into is in a few years' time, we're going to have a Dungeons & Dragons movie starring Chris Pine. It's currently giving us a date of about 2023 to where they'll start filming. But how are you feeling about that? Are you much of a movie guy instead of games?
I do like myself a cinematic masterpiece. D&D has not had the best history whenever it comes to movies, I will admit. But you know what? Chris Pine, he's a solid actor. Person made him. And I'm sure, in today's era where they have been following a little bit more closely to the source material in terms of like Sonic and stuff. I personally kind of think that it will probably turn out pretty good.
Yeah, we've had a good run of at least decent movies based off of video games. You think about the Warcraft movie, which was all right, and then Sonic, which had a rocky launch, but not too bad.
I thought the movie was pretty solid, not gonna lie.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Well, thank you, folks. As you can see, we can all agree here on sometimes, It ain't always have to be a fight. So thank you all so much for tuning in on this week's episode of Geek Without Glasses News, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Have a good weekend.
Sam, shut the fuck up.
That's all for this episode of the Geeks Without Glasses podcast. Join in next week when we talk about the 3 major players in the console industry. I'm Corey.
I'm Blake.
And I'm Kyle.
And this has been the Geeks Without Glasses podcast. Keep on rolling.